I'm here today with Bishop Murray Galloway. His wonderful organization is Homefront Ministries, and he specializes in churches, whether they be rural or city, that cannot afford to have a pastor. He brings a system in, and he begins to rebuild that church and make it strong again to where it can have a full functioning staff and pastor. I've been amazed, and I wanted to know more about him. And today I'm going back to where he first felt that leading, that drawing. Some people call it the calling to serve the Lord. Murray, can you share with us for this segment where you first decided that this is what you want to do the rest of your life?
When I was 5 years old, my parents took me to a youth camp, and at that youth camp, I was baptized in the Holy Spirit. And I became that kid that sat on the front row for every service with my Bible, taking notes, listening to everything the preacher said. And one Sunday night when I was 11 years old, I was sitting on the front seat in Silsbee, Texas, and I felt a definite call during the altar time to preach. Didn't tell anyone except my parents. My parents shared it with my grandparents. My dad went and talked to the pastor about it. He became my hero. The pastor did not look down at me as a child when that happened, but he took me in his arms and encouraged me. And then 3 years later, without telling anyone, we were at a youth rally, and a pastor walked up and asked me to come preach for him. And no one knew that, or we had not told anyone. My brothers didn't even know that I had felt called to preach. And so in Thorne, Mississippi, at 14 years old, out at that little country church, Brother Grady Williams was the pastor's name that asked me to come. And it all went from there. A year later, at that time, it tells you how long ago it was, I got my driver's license when I was 15 years old. And the following summer, after getting my driver's license, everything kind of snowballed or mushroomed on us. I never went back to a formal classroom. I finished my high school, got my high school diploma on the road, but started traveling full-time preaching, and the rest is history. Yeah.
So it looked to me like you had people around you that would respond to that. And it's really amazing to me how when anyone, even those of you that are watching, are members of our ICCI ministry, and those of you that are prospective, that when you open your heart and you feel like this is what I want to do the rest of my life, I want to serve the Lord. And of course we call it being called to preach, because when we were young, that was the focus, that you were called to come and be in the place of a pastor. And today there are so many other callings. I want to talk to you about that a little bit, because although you were called to preach and you did many evangelizations and had revivals that they called, which was a series of nights preaching, you had to support yourself, and you learned to do other things. Tell us a little bit about the entrepreneurial things that you did that supported your ministry while you were growing in that preaching part.
Well, I was very blessed as a young man that I had an uncle who was a farmer, electrician, mechanic. He was a do-it-all kind of guy that asked us, my brothers and I, to come over and work for him on the farm, and I became the gopher. I was the youngest one out there. I was only 8 when we started doing this, but started driving that little yellow Datsun truck that I have the dash or the front grill of that truck hanging on my office wall now.
Oh, wow.
But
trophy.
Yes, it's a trophy and a memory, a great memory. But he taught me so many things to do with my hands in those 3 or 4 years that I was working for him. That my dad didn't do any of those things. He was a salesman deluxe, but he didn't do anything with his hands. But then I became the young guy, and part of this, or most of this, was my pastor's fault. I became the guy that if you had work to do at your church, call Murray, and he will come and work during the day and preach at night. And then when I was 21 years old, we went to a church in Los Angeles, California, for a Sunday morning and stayed 4 years.
Wow.
So we didn't look for that pastorate, but it happened. And while I was there, looking back, I thought it was a tragedy and I thought it was an accident, but God was teaching me things for my future and updating that building that had been built in the 1950s. And then I went from there and planted a church, was the founding pastor of a church in Houston, Mississippi, going from Los Angeles, California to small rural Mississippi. And that was a great experience getting them started. And it was a totally different genre of church than I had been raised in also. And then when I was 29, I was 25 when I left California, and we started that church in Houston, Mississippi. When I was 29, I went to Jackson, Tennessee, and inherited a great building, but had been there less than 8 months when we had the wonderful church split. Someone came in as a little older, a little more experienced, and took all of my younger people and took all the money out of our church. So my response to that, when people were crying, saying, "Oh, our pastor is going to leave," is I bought a house and went to work. And I've done a little bit of everything in my life. Tried anything. My tax man says your tax return is an adventure because I never know what you did last year. And but everything that I did, from sales to carpentry to vinyl siding to, I did a little bit of everything over the years. I managed a direct TV dealership 20 years ago. But everything that we ever did, and I have to put my wife in this also. She is an accountant and a good one, and she worked for years, and it was all about supporting the ministry. We never left the ministry.
Yes.
Ever. It was always about supporting the ministry. That's always been the focus and the goal of our lives. It still is. The chapter has changed, but it's the same book. And it's still the focus and the attention of our lives, and the reason we do the things that we do is to support the ministry. And I believe anyone can do that. I will go one step further and say I believe every preacher should have that entrepreneurial spirit to support the ministry. God gives us the ability to do that. He did it with the Apostle Paul.
He chose men that were entrepreneurial.
Right. Right.
In this segment, we have two other segments that we're going to talk about today, and that people will see them in the corresponding dates after this one airs. But I would like to, for those of you that are listening, to take quite a note here, because he felt that calling. He felt that drawing. God put him in an incubator situation where the grandparents and the parents were proud of that. That may not have been your experience, and you may have fought to get out of the womb. You may have been put into an adoptive situation. But they did have one wisdom that I see as a thread that runs through almost everyone that's called to preach. And that thread is that they put him with his pastor, who wrapped his arms around him and made that relationship and made a memory and was proud of him for what he was doing and began to lead that, and then opened doors, and doors opened to preach and make a way. So God puts you, whether you're being forced out of the womb into an adoptive situation where someone cares for your ministry and helps you to go with wisdom and talk, or you have those around you from the beginning. That's what God does.
Right.
And the other thing that I draw from what you're telling me today is that everything wasn't someone paying you. You've almost done like the rest of us. You paid to preach.
Right.
And God gave you a good life, and you get caught up in everything being about taking care of the ministry and making sure it goes, till now you're sitting in a situation where you're managing churches and being the bishop over men, and you're able to carry them, and you are being paid for the work that you do in the ministry. But it does not take away from the fact that bivocationalism or being entrepreneurial is a secret of the ministry.
Right.
I can imagine, and we don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but would you address how that some preachers made you feel second class for raising your own money through the works of your hands?
I went to a conference one time, had gone through a very tough time in our local church, and at the end of the message, there was an altar call, if you please, for preachers. And I was over in the corner weeping because I was under a lot of pressure at home. And a guy came by and knelt down beside me, put his arm around me, and whispered in my ear and said, "Until you get serious about the ministry, nothing's ever going to get better for you." I was righteously indignant.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fancy way I was mad.
Mm-hmm.
And
How could you get more serious?
how can you be more serious than working 60 hours a week at something else in order to be able to pastor?
Yeah, they
or
said
preach?
you're not full time.
Right.
But
I
how
was-
much more full time can you be
Yes.
than working, building?
I was told by the head of the ministerial group that I was a part of, get out of business as quickly as possible and be full-time in the ministry.
You know, Murray, that's amazing, and that's amazing that we suffered that, and not one time did Jesus command the apostles.
No.
He said, "Follow me," and they did, and then he told them, "Go fishing," and then he told them one day to pay the bills by catching a fish.
Right.
He didn't tell them to put away, but yet it seems to be the popular culture
Right.
that people want to be full time. Well, how much more full time can you be than working a job or business or entrepreneurial skills and having God supply the money and then working 40 more hours in the kingdom work?
Right. I would say, along with that, what about all the pastors' wives who get up and go to a job every day so that their husband can spend more time with the ministry?
And hopefully they do. I know many of them play golf and spend
Yeah.
time at the restaurants where their wife literally spends years and years and years building a retirement for the pair of them. So that thing cuts all kinds of ways. It just was not biblical.
Right.
And we can say in this session here, when you're called to the ministry, you may also be given the gifting of making the way that makes that thing happen. I'm thinking of one of our wonderful ministers in Illinois who actually trains young people to play basketball. It's his ministry. It's where he has a chance to, he and his wife impact families. They impact a city. They impact a state now and beginning to spread around the state. But that always intrigues me, that would not he send us, like Paul, to go with the tent makers
Right.
and do the work. So I want to encourage those of you that are especially serve in this ministry, and those of you that may have just been passing by FaceTime or Facebook or Constant Contact or by my blog or wherever you're receiving this on Medium, God has put you in our place right now for two men to witness to you that yes, we do spend the majority of our time now working on ministerial things, but it was never God's wisdom to take us out of the business world when he could supply quickly sometimes the money to do the work that others would not pay for in the ministry. So this has been a very intriguing segment of time that we're spending with Bishop Murray Galloway. He's in Homefront Ministries. There'll be in the tag or in the lines be his address. You can write him. You can look him up on Facebook and find him there, Bishop Murray Galloway, Pontotoc, Mississippi. Perhaps one of it is other places. It doesn't really matter. He has enough places where the Son of Man had no place to lay his head. He has many places to lay his head, and many pastors that are looking at him for the answer. So Murray, I want to say thanks to you for opening up and sharing that space. You didn't know at 11 when you said you would preach that you'd also do all the things you've done.
And may I say this very quickly? Everyone has unique giftings, but you have a gifting. You don't have to do it my way or Bishop's way, but there is something that you are gifted with that God can use to help you finance and support the ministry if you're willing to do that.
Yeah.
You have it.
Yeah. Hang in here with us and watch for it. It'll be up on subsequent days. God bless you. Thank you for taking 10 today and changing your life. God bless you.